Hi, I'm Peter J. Ray. Welcome to Adventures in History. Today's topic is Abraham Lincoln, Part 16, the Gettysburg Address. Now, we stopped last time in 1863 in the fall, in the fall election in Ohio, the Democratic candidate for governor was Clement Vallandigham, who had been exiled for treason, and he was living in Canada. And the Republican candidate was John Brough. And Brough won, spelled B-R-O-U-G-H. So Vallandigham lost, this guy who was considered a traitor for not supporting the war. Abraham Lincoln said, quote, "Glory to God in the highest. Ohio has saved the nation." So that would have been pretty tough if Vallandigham had been elected governor in the 1863 election. In Pennsylvania, the Republican candidate was Andrew Curtin, and he also won. So that was good news for President Lincoln. Sarah Josepha Hale was a woman who was the editor of Godley's Ladies' Book. And back starting in the 1840s, she had a campaign to nationalize Thanksgiving, that the whole country should celebrate Thanksgiving on the same day. This woman, Hale, was the author of Mary Had a Little Lamb, this children's poem. October 3rd, President Lincoln received a letter from this lady. Her name is Sarah Josepha Hale, and she was taught. She said, was proposing her idea and President Lincoln thought it was a good idea, and he made a statement that Thanksgiving would be a national holiday, and it would be on the last Thursday of November, giving thanks to God for, quote, "the blessings of fruitful fields and healthful skies, and to ask for the almighty hand to heal the wounds of the nation, and to restore it as soon as may be consistent with the divine purposes to the full enjoyment of peace, harmony, tranquility, and union." So not only did President Lincoln make Thanksgiving a national holiday, the last Thursday of November, but he also started the tradition of pardoning the White House turkey. Now, there had been a turkey sent to the White House in 1863 for this Thanksgiving dinner, and President Lincoln's son Tad became attached to this turkey, and he called the bird Jack. And he learned that the bird was going to be killed and eaten for Thanksgiving. And this boy, Lincoln's son, stormed into a cabinet meeting demanding that the bird be saved, and President Lincoln agreed and pardoned. So that was the first turkey to be pardoned by a president. Illustrator Thomas Nast created, he did a lot of illustrating. He was an artist, and he, according to history, created the Republican elephant as a symbol for the Republican Party, the Democratic donkey, and for the donkey, a symbol for the Democrats, and Uncle Sam, symbol for the United States. And he also created the modern Santa Claus. He made this illustration for Christmas of 1863, Santa Claus delivering presents to the front and to Union soldiers. Union General Ulysses S Grant was asked who was the most important person in the Civil War life, and he said Thomas Nast, because Nast helped raise morale for everyone, especially this Santa Claus delivering presents to Union troops at the front. So back to the story of Thanksgiving. Previously. Thanksgiving had been state by state at the discretion of the governor. They would set the dates, and it might be different dates. And William Seward did support the idea of, and he was supportive. President Lincoln had a proclamation giving thanks to the beneficent Father and commending to God's care widows, orphans, and mourners and sufferers of the war, and called on God to heal the wounded nations and restore the country to peace and harmony and tranquility. Home Sweet Home became a popular song during the Civil War. Opposing armies, Confederate and Union armies, sometimes were separated by only a short distance, hundreds of yards. There was a story that in April of 1863, Union soldiers on the Rappahannock River played the popular song for the South, Dixie, and the rebels nearby responded by playing Yankee Doodle, and then both sides were cheering. So you see this in the midst of the war, this sense of friendship among the enemies. Of course, they were all Americans. By 1863, William Seward was no longer ambitious to become president. He hoped that President Lincoln would be reelected, and Seward said, quote, that when the rebels, quote, find the people reaffirming their decision to have you president, I think their rebellion will collapse. November 2nd, 1863, was a big wedding. Kate Chase, the daughter of the secretary in the cabinet, Salmon Chase, married William Sprague, who was a congressman. It was the social event of the decade. Kate had a diamond worth $50,000. Historian Doris Kearns Goodwin wrote, quote, the spectacle offered a brief respite from the endless sorrows of the war, the casualty reports, the scenes of suffering in the hospitals, the rumors of impending military engagements. And President Lincoln and his cabinet members attended this high-profile wedding. In October, General Ulysses S. Grant was in charge of the Department of the Ohio, Cumberland, and Tennessee Rivers. President Lincoln accepted an invitation to speak in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, to dedicate the first national military cemetery on November 19th, and he was the last speaker. There were other speakers. He wore his usual tall silk hat, wide mourning band for his son Willie, who had died. And at Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, the children there were selling cookies, lemonade, and souvenir bullets and cannonballs to the visitors. 1,500 people came to this for the dedication of the Gettysburg Cemetery from different parts of the country. The main speaker was Edward Everett, who spoke for 2 hours and 8 minutes. And then President Lincoln gave a short speech, which became famous, the Gettysburg Address, quote, 77 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Now we are engaged in a great civil war, testing whether that nation or any nation so conceived and so dedicated can long endure. We are met on a great battlefield of that war. We have come to dedicate a portion of that field as a final resting place for those who here gave their lives, that nation might live. It is altogether fitting and proper that we should do this. But in a larger sense, we cannot dedicate, we cannot consecrate, we cannot hallow this ground. The brave men, living and dead, who struggled here have consecrated it far above our poor power to add or detract. The world will little note what we say here, but it can never forget what they did here. It is for us, the living, rather to be dedicated here to the unfinished work which they who fought here have thus far so nobly advanced. It is rather for us to be here dedicated to the great task remaining before us, that from these honored dead we take increased devotion to that cause for which they gave the last full measure of devotion, that we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain, that this nation under God shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, and for the people shall not perish from the earth. President Lincoln returned to the White House. He was sick with smallpox after giving that speech at Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. On November 24th, Union General Joe Hooker retook Chattanooga, Tennessee, and there was a victory at Missionary Ridge. President Lincoln was grateful for the Union and victories at Gettysburg, Vicksburg, and Chattanooga, and there was talk of the war coming to an end and reconstruction of the southern states back into the Union. Now back to the Gettysburg Address, historian Doris Kearns Goodwin wrote, quote, Abraham Lincoln had translated the story of his country and the meaning of the war into words and ideas accessible to every American. The child who would sleeplessly rework his father's yarns into tales comprehensible to any boy had forged for his country an ideal of its past, present, and future that would be recited and memorized by students forever. President Lincoln was sick after this, again, after the Gettysburg visit. There was news that Ulysses S. Grant had ended the siege of Chattanooga, Tennessee, and driven the Confederates back into northern Georgia. Now, the Union troops who were in the West were more successful and needed less encouragement from President Lincoln than the Union troops in the East who struggled so much. President Lincoln at this time had a dream that he was at a party and guests were saying of him that, quote, "He is a very common-looking man." And President Lincoln responded and said, quote, "The Lord prefers common-looking people. That is the reason he makes so many of them." So the first, 1863, the first national Thanksgiving for the country, national holiday. On December 2nd, the U.S. Capitol was finished. The dome was finished. And at that time, there were 100,000 African-American troops in the Union Army. President Lincoln knew insubordination was a crime against military discipline, but subordination was a crime against American nature because Americans were very independent and a free people. So he tended to be very lenient when he got requests for pardons, and he pardoned many soldiers who had been guilty of crimes during the war. There was a story of an Irish soldier who ran away during a battle and said, quote, "Well, Captain, it was not my fault. I have a heart in me, breast as brave as Julius Caesar, but when the battle begins, somehow or other, those cowardly legs of mine will turn away with me." December 9th, 1863, Confederate General Robert E. Lee visited his home in Richmond, Virginia. His home had been lost. His wife was very sick. One of his sons was in prison. Another was severely depressed. He had a daughter who had died and was buried in a far-off cemetery, and he had a daughter-in-law who was near death. He was aging. His hair and beard were white. Hard times for Robert E. Lee and many others. Historian Stephen Barry wrote, quote, "By 1864, the Lincoln administration had suffered all kinds of embarrassment at Todd hands." He's talking about the family of Mary Todd's siblings and siblings-in-law. Mary's brother David had been exposed as a desecrator of Union corpses. Her brother George had been exposed as a looter of Union homes. Brothers Sam and Alec had literally died to see the Union unmade. Emily, the wife of a Confederate general, had slept for a week at the White House. Elizabeth's husband had grown rich at the government's expense. There was a policy of prisoner exchanges during the war. Both sides were taking prisoners, and they would exchange them, so they would not have the burden of taking care of them. Now, the South refused to include black prisoners at this time, and this led to the Union response of stopping prisoner exchanges for a time, and the result was a massive overcrowding of the prison systems in the North and South. President Lincoln said, quote, "Don't it seem strange that I should be here, I, a man who couldn't cut a chicken's head off, with blood pouring all around me?" Friday was execution day for desertion and other military crimes, where Union soldiers, were executed for their crimes. And there was a story once President Lincoln was getting the notification of these executions and the paperwork, and one time he said, quote, "Get out of the way. Tomorrow is Butcher Day, and I must go through these papers and see if I cannot find some excuse to let these poor fellows off." So he spent a lot of time reading the stories of what they had done and making decisions about whom he would pardon, and he was very lenient. President Lincoln said, quote, "Some of my generals complained that I impaired discipline and subordination in the Army by my pardons and respites. But it makes me rested after a day's hard work if I can find some good excuse for saving a man's life. and I go to bed happy as I think how joyous the signing of my name will make him and his family and friends." A Union general was complaining to President Lincoln that his pardons made disciplining the troops difficult. President Lincoln said, quote, "General, there are too many weeping widows in the United States now. For God's sakes, do not ask me to add to the number, for I tell you plainly I won't do it." In January, President Lincoln ordered the suspension of execution in all capital cases in the military, and there was a February order that the sentence for desertion would be commuted to imprisonment for the rest of the war. There was one funny story of an imprisoned soldier who had said to his sergeant, quote, "If you arrest me, I will rip your damn guts out and scatter them on the parade ground." Historian William C. Davis wrote, quote, "As children look to their fathers for both discipline and forgiveness, so the children of Father Abraham knew that in him they had one sure friend to offer help in extremity." President Lincoln said, quote, "On the whole, my impression is that mercy bears richer fruits than any other attribute." In February of 1864, President Lincoln was having a cabinet meeting that was interrupted. A woman from Iowa insisted that she must see President Lincoln. She said she just had to have a look at the president. And Lincoln said, quote, "Well, in the matter of looking at one another, I have altogether the advantage." More self-deprecating humor. Now, at this time, the Confederate Army age limits were expanded from ages 17 to 50, as the Confederates were struggling to put men in the field. In March, President Lincoln called for 700,000 new troops for the Union Army. February 10th, there was a fire at the White House horse stables. Arson, it was believed it was set intentionally, arson. President Lincoln tried to enter the burning building and was restrained. 6 horses burned to death. President Lincoln was in tears. One of the horses that died was a pony that had belonged to his deceased son, Willie. President Lincoln enjoyed going to plays at 2 theaters in Washington, Grover's and Ford's. They were a respite, and he had renewal and by being immersed in these plays, relief. He enjoyed Shakespeare, Henry IV. Now, in the 19th century, at these plays, there was a development of gas lights, and which could change the lighting. They could dim and brighten the illumination. They could mimic or make it look like a setting sun, a full moon, or a misty evening. There were spotlights, so this was really good. Before coming to Washington, President Lincoln had seen few live performances. He really enjoyed Shakespeare, King Lear, Richard III, Henry VIII, Hamlet, and Macbeth. He enjoyed the tragedy and comedy of Shakespeare equally. Mary's half-sister, Emily Todd Helm, whose husband, Confederate General Benjamin Hardin Helm, who had been killed at the Battle of Chickamauga, she had come to spend some time at the White House. She returned to their family home in Kentucky. President Lincoln's unconquerable spirit was infused into the North. He was patient but determined to win the war. This is early spring of 1864. Regarding slavery and the Civil War, President Lincoln said, quote, "If God now wills the removal of a great wrong," he's talking about slavery, "and wills also that we of the North as well as you of the South shall pay fairly for our complicity in that wrong, impartial history will find therein new cause to attest and revere the justice and goodness of God." President Lincoln continued, quote, "The will of God prevails. I am almost ready to say that this is probably true, that God wills this contest," in other words, the U.S. Civil War, "and wills that it shall not end yet." So he was talking about one interpretation. He was talking about how Americans were paying their karmic debt for the destruction of American Indians and African American slavery. President Lincoln attended church services at the New York Avenue Presbyterian Church in Washington City. August 6, 1864, President Lincoln called for a national day of humiliation, prayer, and fasting. Historian William Lee Miller wrote, quote, President Lincoln gave carefully stated reasons, not slogans, justifying his actions, displaying respect for the humanity of the enemy, for his own side, and for the society of mutual deliberation that was being protected and reborn. He explicitly avoided malice and hatred. Salmon Chase, who was in the cabinet, wanted to be president, and he tried to make political capital when President Lincoln removed General Rosecrans. This brought laughter to President Lincoln, who said, quote, "I suppose Chase will, like the blue bottle fly, lay his eggs in every rotten spot he can find." Nice quote there. In March, Ulysses S. Grant, the hero of Vicksburg and Chattanooga, arrived in Washington City on March 8th to take overall command of the Union Army. Grant liked pork and beans. He was a simple taste, and the White House caterers, who were used to serving, quote, delicate palates of the other generals, were reportedly in, quote, in spasms, upset by Grant's liking of pork and beans. The spring of 1864, there were food riots in Richmond and Atlanta. Clothing in the South was in short supply, and shops were vandalized in various cities. Now, by the end of 1863, there were 100,000 black troops in the Union Army. In March of 1864, President Lincoln met General Ulysses S. Grant for the first time. There was hope that the summer of 1864 there would be decisive victories and an end to the war. That didn't happen. Grant received the rank of lieutenant general, the first since George Washington. There was resentment in Kentucky regarding black troops in the Union Army. President Lincoln's choice had been to lose the Union or arm black troops. So he knew he was paying a political price by doing this, but he needed black troops to win the war. And the Confederate Army was in really bad shape, shortages of food, shoes, blankets, and their horses were starving. April of 1864, black troops in the Union Army, President Lincoln said that black troops in the Union Army deserve the right to vote. And by this time, there were 179 black troops in the Union Army. In April of 1864, the black regiments paraded down Pennsylvania Avenue in Washington City and were reviewed by President Lincoln. And when the black troops saw the president, Abraham Lincoln, they sang, cheered, and danced while marching. In April of 1864, Jefferson Davis, president of the Confederate States of America in Richmond, Virginia, at his home, his 5-year-old son fell off the second-floor balcony of their home and died. Very tragic. April 14th, Fort Pillow, Memphis, Tennessee, there was a massacre of Union troops. 580 Union troops, including 292 black troops who had surrendered to Confederate forces under General Nathan Bedford Forrest. So this became a rallying cry. There's a Union offensive. General George Meade in the Army of the Potomac in northern Virginia against General Lee. General William Tecumseh Sherman in Georgia was trying to capture Atlanta. President Lincoln found General Grant was happy about these developments, and he believed that the purpose of at this point, continuing, was not to capture Richmond or Atlanta, but to simply to fight the Confederate Army until they were destroyed and the South surrendered. There was the Battle of the Wilderness in May of 1864, a very bloody battle, considered a standoff between Ulysses S. Grant's Union Army and Robert E. Lee's Confederate Army. And President Lincoln responded and said, quote, my God, 20,000 poor souls sent to their final account in one day. I cannot bear it. So more hard times in the war. David S. Reynolds wrote, quote, his pallid face, disheveled hair, and dark rings under his eyes gave him a ghastly look. He found solace in one of the gloomiest passages in literature. He picked up volume of Shakespeare and found Macbeth's most famous soliloquy. The haunting words came forth slowly in Lincoln's high-pitched voice. Tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow creeps in this petty place from day to day. to the last syllable of recorded time, and all our yesterdays have lighted fools the way to dusty death. Out, out, briar candle, life's but a walking shadow, a poor player that struts and frets his hour upon the stage, and then is heard no more. It is a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. So that's a very depressing quote that seemed to comfort President Lincoln in this very dark time. Your Mission became a popular song at this time by Philip Phillips. David S. Reynolds said, quote, Phillips' song validated President Lincoln's belief that even the lowliest worker merits respect. One can be a common sailor, the song says, and not a captain or a laborer in the valley instead of a mountain climber, a person doing menial work rather than a millionaire, and yet still make a significant contribution to the world. David S. Reynolds wrote, quote, Abraham Lincoln accepted Sir Walter Scott's dictum that if one's motives were good, they needed no explanation. If they were bad, they could never be convincingly defended. David S. Reynolds wrote, quote, Abraham Lincoln's jokes and stories helped relieve the pain for him and the nation. There was a book called Old Abe's Jokes that came out. Regarding that book, David S. Reynolds wrote, quote, the book directly called Abraham Lincoln, quote, the national joker, and argued that he was precisely the president America needed in a time of national bloodletting, someone who through the worst still saw the bright side of life. David Ross Locke, also known as Petroleum Vesuvius Nasby, was a popular humorist or comedian during this time, and he had a strong influence on the fall of slavery and helping change public opinion. And he was considered the strongest anti-democratic soldier on the cultural front. President Lincoln liked and trusted Ulysses S. Grant. Grant was unpretentious, businesslike. He was inattentive to rank or protocol, simple and direct. President Lincoln said, quote, General Grant doesn't worry and bother me. He isn't shrieking for reinforcements all the time. He takes what troops we can safely give him and does the best he can with what he has got. So President Lincoln trusted General Grant, gave him freedom to do what he wanted in the war. Now, the Union Army had the advantage. They were confident, well-clothed, equipped, and had ample ammunition. The Confederates were ill-clad at this time, ill-equipped, but they had a strong spirit. So they were confident as well. Confederate General Robert E. Lee hoped that the Union would quit, that the victory would not be worth the cost. That was what he was still hoping for. Again, the Battle of the Wilderness, May of 1860 war in Virginia, 18,000 Union casualties, 11,000 Union casualties. In May there was the Battle of Spotsylvania, Virginia, another Union defeat, 7,000 Union casualties, 1,500 Confederate casualties. However, President Lincoln remained confident in General Grant. At that Battle of the Wilderness in Virginia, there were ravines, bogs, dense vines, thorn bushes, very tough conditions. 7 weeks of fighting, 86,000 Union and Confederate combined casualties. However, despite these hardships, again, President Lincoln never lost faith in General Grant. President Lincoln was talking about as his re-election was getting, or the year he was. The election where he would try to be reelected was getting closer. And he told a story about a Dutch farmer and said it was not best to swap horses when crossing streams. That became a popular slogan that presidents would use during wartime to say, well, they ought to be reelected. Lincoln said it the first time. There were critics who talked about General Grant's and reported alcoholism. President Lincoln said, quote, what does he drink? The answer, whiskey. Well, just find out what particular kind he uses, and I'll send a barrel to each of the other generals. Now, so this spring into the summer of 1864, there had been 32,000 Union casualties in 2 weeks, President Lincoln said, quote, "Why do we suffer reverses after reverses? Could we have avoided this terrible bloody war? Is it ever to end?" And then he said this about General Grant, quote, "The great thing about General Grant is his perfect coolness and persistency of purpose. He is not easily excited, and he has the grit of a bulldog. Once let him get his teeth in, and nothing can shake him off." Well, that concludes today's presentation. Good luck to you with your efforts in history. If there's so many wonderful history books to read out there. You might consider checking out our website, Adventures in History with Peter J. Ray at peterjray.com. So far, we've made 731 history videos in 8 areas: world history, American history, book reviews, poetic tours, Cleveland baseball, family history, autobiography, and Cleveland basketball. There's a donate feature. You might consider making a donation to support this work. If you live in Metro Manila, Philippines, and are looking for a high school, you might consider Restless Educational Center. Restless is located on Allenby Street, not far from the corner of P. Guevara and Wilson Street, in San Juan, Metro Manila, Philippines. At Restless, we specialize in helping young people who have had difficulty in the larger traditional schools. And we're more than a school, we are a warm, supportive community. And the website is restless.education, RESALEST. Thanks so much for watching. I really appreciate it. God bless you. Take care, and I'll see you next time.